Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Down the Pub podcast, the podcast where we bring you the typical conversations you would end up having down at the pub when you run out of other subjects to talk about. Once again, I am your host, Peter Simpson, contributor to the Wolves of Westminster. And with me, once again, I have Patrick Timms, editor of Wolves of Westminster. Hello, Patrick.
Hello to you too.
And we also have the other contributor, Simon, with us today. Hello, Simon.
Good evening, Peter.
Good evening. So, big topic, well, many big topics today, and I'm sure we won't get through them all, but one of the big ones, obviously, is the budget's coming up. It's late in terms of when usually you'd have an autumn budget, and Rachel Reeves gave a pre-budget speech effectively telling everyone to brace for tax rises. I think is probably the best way to put it. Nobody's happy with it. The FTSE 100 went down, the pound lost about a cent or two to the dollar. Yeah, nobody's happy, but interest rates kept at 4%, so that's good. So,
one of the good bits of news from this week, I think that's fair. But at the same time, I don't think this is a case of the markets are happy because there is stability. I don't think there's that. I think the markets are unhappy because there is instability, there is uncertainty, and people don't know what is going to happen. Employers and employees don't know what is going to happen by the end of the month, which it will. I believe it's November the 26th, something like that, that the budget is supposed to come out. And so, at that point, we're going to find out exactly how many of our assets or savings or whatever it is the Chancellor is going to raid. And we don't know. I've been speaking, internally within Westminster sources. They don't know either, which is very unusual. So I think these plans are being kept very much under wraps. And the Chancellor's speech was to, as you say, to foreshadow the fact that pain is coming. Alongside that, we have the newly elected deputy leader of the Labour Party, Lucy Powell, who has gone public, and this has been covered by the BBC, saying that Labour should stick to manifesto pledges on tax and should not raise any taxation rates. So what we now have is a collision course between the new deputy leader of the governing party and its own chancellor, and this foreshadows something else. That we could have a power struggle within number 10 and number 11.
Which is exactly, I imagine, what Keir Starmer didn't want. And I mean, where's Keir Starmer throughout this entire episode? Well, he's taken a jet to go to Brazil for COP 30 odd, whatever it is, to tell the whole world you should not be flying as much because of the carbon footprint, which is something that is brought up absolutely every year. And to be honest with you, I've made a prediction quite a lot on my own channel, but I'll say it on this podcast as well. I think the whole green agenda is going to be dead by 2030 anyway. I think we've got kind of 4 more years of COP, if that, because everyone, literally everyone at this point is kind of saying, well, nobody likes Ed Miliband, really. If people who understand say that your bills, energy bills especially, are going high because he's the type of person who said on an interview the only reason your energy bills are high is because of global gas and oil prices, which is crazy because we have 78. Well, yeah, I mean they're falling, and our price is still going up because we're leaning so much into going from 30% renewable to 90 odd, whatever he wants it by 2030, which just isn't going to happen and will cost a bomb. Unless, obviously, we can raise a lot of money, which I suppose is the point of this particular budget, because they can't cut anything. They tried that. The backbenchers said no. I think I read this in the Times, but there was one report that a backbencher was saying, "I don't understand why we need to raise taxes. It's only £5 billion," which I think it was Ronald Reagan who said, "Oh, a few billion here, a few billion there." Very quickly, that turns into real money. But the joke being, it's always real money, and someone has to pay for it. But I mean, the harshest words people say about this Labour government is they are economically inept. And frankly, Penny Mordaunt and Rishi Sunak were completely right. They are going to raise your taxes. A lot of us already knew this, but we also didn't trust the Tories not to raise our taxes either.
Rishi would have, almost certainly tried to do something very similar. I think it's depressing the extent to which they've easily become the Tories. It's like an even worse version of what was going on. It's very depressing, but I find it very conspicuous as well that Keir Starmer, as you said, is not here. He's in Brazil. I don't actually think I've heard anything from him for weeks. He's not popped into my mind because last week has basically been Siobhan on the move because of the migrant accidental release. What's Rachel Reeves going to do with the budget and how hard is it going to hit everybody? And now, of course, David Lammy. And Starmer and health. Not heard a word.
Well, I mean, this is probably why we have that power struggle with Lucy Powell. The leader's not saying anything, I'm the deputy leader. I'm going to go against message because, frankly, that's probably why people voted for her, to keep the left wing of that party alive. And honestly, I hate to say it, it's probably the best way it's going to survive.
I don't know.
What was that, Simon?
Well, I think this is one of the things that where what we see is that, we've said this on this podcast before, that governance is hard. And everybody who gets in, especially if you get with the landslide majority, they sort of think, right, now we're in charge, everything's going to be fine. And then they realise that there was a reason why the last governing party wasn't doing the things that you wanted them to do, except that now that they know what that reason is. But despite that, there's that famous note from Liam Byrne. I'm sorry, I'm afraid there is no money. This goes back 15 years. But back then, it wasn't as easy as it is now for even the opposition to have access to a picture on the actual status of the nation's finances. So there is far less of an excuse now. For saying, "Oh, we didn't know it's going to be this bad." Sorry, you don't get to get away with that. Now, with that said, the situation that Labour has inherited is, it's not fantastic, is it? Nobody's going to suggest that it is fantastic. But at the same time, you have okay, you said you thought you could do this better. Doesn't look very much as though you can.
Which a lot of right-wingers were expecting, because a lot of right-wingers, frankly, have diagnosed the problem correctly. The state's too big. You're clearly past the Laffer curve. I mean, Arthur Laffer's been all over. He's been everywhere the past couple of weeks, basically telling every podcast and interview he can get on to say, it makes sense to raise income tax, sure, but let's face it, the biggest bill on the state is the welfare bill. If you tax work, you pay people not to work, you're going to get more people not working. Of course you are, because not...
Well, exactly. He's passed 400 billion off the wall, trying to pay people not to work, and then we're wondering why people no longer want to work. I wanted to ask Simon what the picture is like, what the similarities are or differences in Poland, if you're aware.
It is quite similar in many ways, but the key difference is, because of where we started out, we've experienced a lot more economic growth than the UK has in the last 20 years. The main similarity is that we also have a very, very big welfare state, and that is actually something that's quite different between the mainstream right in Poland and the mainstream right here. Because the Tories pay a lot of lip service to cutting the welfare state, and they don't tend to. Whereas in Poland, our ruling party, Law and Justice, or up until recently our ruling party, were openly welfareist in a sort of reform-esque way. It was very hang the pedos, fund the NHS. I think it's the best way to describe it. That's what they were doing.
It's a vote winner, yeah.
It is a vote winner up until the point where all your 18 to 25-year-olds realise it's sort of screwing them over and they start doing things like voting for far-right libertarians, which is exactly what happened. Our version of like the proper hardcore libertarian party is on 36% among people under 30 now.
Well,
and it's just about similar with young women, which is quite rare.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the picture is broadly similar. The only difference is we had more economic growth because we don't have ridiculous energy costs, and our planning regime is a lot more.
I mean, on that point as well of young people voting libertarian, I'm seeing actually, I'm kind of surprised by this, but there's a lot of polling coming out that you get to about 30 odd years old, I think it's 30 to 31, neck and neck when it comes to Reform and Labour vote. You go younger, it goes more Reform. You go older, it goes more Labour. I don't know what it is about the 40-year-olds, but they are Labour acolytes. I just don't. My brother's around that age, and I asked him like, why do all of you love Labour so much? And basically, the only answer we can come up with is that we all like Tony Blair.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, so but I mean, as much as everyone tries to call Reform socialist, basically nobody believes it. And obviously Nigel Farage had a speech this week. I think it was it this Monday or last week? I think it was this Monday. Where effectively he gave a speech on the economy, no real policy aside from, these tax cuts we promised in the last contract, we can't do them for obvious reasons, making him one of the most honest politicians that we've had in the 21st century, to be fair to him. But he was making the overarching point the direction Reform are going to go, which is less state, more ability for people to earn their own way in life and become rich maybe, while at the same time having the social safety net as an actual social safety net, and be pro-natal where you can, such as with, he clarified, say, the two-child benefit cap. Obviously he doesn't want it. Everyone said, oh, that's for everyone. No, that's only for British couples who are both working. They want to make work pay, which is very much what we need in Britain, because at the moment, if you do have a job, you feel like it's pointless. I think there was a ratio of, like, there were 1.2 million graduates this year from uni or something, and they were all fighting for about 17,000 jobs.
Oh, it's horrible. We are in genuine. I think mathematically we are the worst graduate market in all of Europe, in the world, apart from maybe Japan.
Yeah, so it's I mean, I thought I had it bad as, pushing 30. No, the under 25 are screwed. It's no wonder 40% of them are technically disabled and are on PIP. Why wouldn't you be? You can't make money.
And the depressing thing is, I've actually done a full PIP application for someone before. It's really hard, but it's somehow easier than getting a job.
The biggest problem. The biggest problem I'm aware of with PIP for honest people, if you're completely dishonest and you're getting coached, it's quite easy because you basically just say you can't do anything ever. Yeah. Whereas, because I know family who have done it, and it took 2 attempts, took over 2 years, and very much kind of needed the money. Finally, you get it, but it was so late that they had to pay. Like, I think PIP had to pay over like 10 grand or something. It took that long for the money to come, like for the process to go, because it was over a year.
Yeah.
And this is the problem.
You can combine it with things like universal credit, and then you can probably earn about 35,000 tax free.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if UC is tax free, but you can get really good money if you combine that with PIP and maybe get Motability on top of it.
Well, of course, now this is not in vogue at the moment. There are people, even the incumbent government, are saying, "Oh dear, there are far too many people on PIP." There are people claiming this is why they've cracked down on Motability cars for people just because they've got ADHD or something like that. With that said, as someone who does have a long-term condition which has been diagnosed privately, but I don't have the evidence for. Because private doctors, I'll tell you, if you're not on their books, they're like lawyers. They will give you an opinion, not a diagnosis. You see? Right. Now I'm going through that same process with the NHS, but because I don't have anything yet, I can't actually, And even if I did claim PIP, well, PIP is about 400 quid a month. Universal credit is about, if you get the maximum, it's about 400 quid a month, and then there's the other maximum thing. I forget what it is now. That is to do with universal credit. That's another 400 quid. Okay, so that's 1,200 quid a month. That will not even pay all of my bills. Okay, so I'm certainly, I am cautious about the statement made earlier that you can earn 35 grand. No.
I think,
not just off those benefits. No, you can't.
No.
And so what I could do with at the moment is a state that will prioritise getting you work rather than putting on benefits. Now, I think with all due fairness to the Prime Minister and to this government, they have sort of cottoned on to that. They just don't know what to do with the welfare culture. And indeed, there was that show. Now, when was this? It was quite a few years ago now. Remember Benefit Street?
Yeah.
Now, I've known people who might be second or third generations of families that have just never worked. They've never worked. Never worked because they never needed to. And and it becomes almost a cultural thing. We don't work, we just live off the state. And yes, we've still got our 50-inch TV and all of that. But sadly, even that is, well, I say sadly, quite probably rightly, that is now becoming less in vogue, even under a Labour government. And what that tells you is that the state is realising that it's become so big and it's become so, for want of a better word, exorbitant, which is a very good word, I think the thing is, people know, and I'm going to, in the state, I mean, and I'm going to refer, this sounds like I'm massively segueing, but I'm actually not. Okay, shut up, you know.
You know what you like,
but,
yes.
But I'm going to talk about the whole thing to do with, like, Jimmy Savile. I'm not going to talk about it in detail.
Pardon?
No, I'm not going to talk about it in detail.
Yeah, okay.
I recall, on Have I Got News for You, Mr. Ian Hislop, who, of course, had many contacts in that era, and at that time, and with those people, he said people didn't know, except that they did know, but they didn't know, if you see what I mean, which is to say they suspected.
Yeah.
That is the meaning that I take from what he said, and I understand it, because especially back then, but even now, there can be things where you do know, but you can't say with definitivity, if that makes any sense. They did know that there was something going on, but they didn't officially know. They couldn't prove it. And I think that is, I know it's a very weird segue, but I think that's what's been going on in both the Cabinet Office and the Treasury about the economy for some time, is that, both in terms of ministers and in terms of civil servants, but in particular the latter, that basically everything's going to S. And they know that, but they don't officially know it, if you see what I mean. So it's like, yeah, we know we're pretty much buggered, but nobody's willing to talk about it, and that's why it doesn't get talked about it. And that's also why successive governments, including Conservative ones, the present Labour one, and possibly a future Reform one, is going to have to deal with the fact that, economically speaking, we are basically buggered, and there are going to have to be hard choices that are offered to the electorate. Now, let's look at one of the last people to try that one. Theresa May.
Theresa May, yeah.
With the, as Labour branded it, the dementia tax.
Mm-hmm.
You actually try offering what would have been a proper solution, sort of, and even that gets shot down. You don't only have the media to deal with here; you have the electorate as well, and that the fact that she even managed to sort of win that election, post that revelation is astonishing. I have to. It's one of the reasons I respect her, actually, and I do.
Yeah, it was. That was a good idea. Probably kind of the best chance you had for that. I mean, also to criticise Theresa May, while she did have a good idea for that tax, she is also one of the large reasons that things like you can get a car on ADHD, which is a bit of it's a bit hyperbolic, but in an attempt to not be seen as the nasty party, it was very much social care now needs to be as important as actual healthcare. Therefore, it's they tried to move everyone off the old disability benefits onto this new one, PIP, and it kind of was working at first, but then Theresa May came in. I think it was the Mental Health Act, something like that, under Jeremy Hunt came in, and then that's when people started to realise, having anxiety and things like that do go towards getting PIP, because usually if you have a car due to anxiety, that's kind of a secondary to something else, which will be officially diagnosed, and that official diagnosis can cause anxiety, things like that.
Well, if you can get one, but at the same time, I mean,
Sure.
I've got a list of things that are wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
I have ADHD, but I do have ADD. I've got OCD. I'm on this autistic spectrum. I have the condition that I have, the fungal condition that causes my seizures. There's all manner of things I could use to claim for that, but I haven't. Okay, so my point being, yes, you can get all that kind of thing. It's also worth bearing in mind that she was also the Prime Minister that enshrined net zero by 2050 and more. Okay, I think she thought that was her legacy.
Yeah.
I get that. All prime ministers want some kind of legacy. They all do. And I have no idea what Sir Keir Starmer is going to.
Oh, well, I have a prediction for that. I think he's going to be the killing prime minister with the. I know it's a private member's bill, to be fair, but I think the Suicide Act's going to go through, euthanasia bill, whatever. So that'll go through. That'll cause Canadian healthcare levels of problems.
You remember that.
Yeah, I think that's what people are going to remember him for. So well done. This is the problem with all the recent prime ministers. They're all remembered for terrible things.
I think Truss is actually better off than him because people don't remember her. Truss
is very lucky in the regard that she was only in for 7 weeks, and everyone's already forgotten that she was prime minister when Queen Elizabeth died. So it's
that was it. She comes in, oversees all the most important historical events of the last 50, 60 years, and just disappears. Really extraordinary ability to screw it up.
Ruined any sort of push for right wing economics for about 5 years as well, but we'll live with that.
What it shows, in fairness, is that if you actually try and get anything done, which, in fairness to her, she did,
badly, but yes.
But the point is, what have you even tried?
Yeah.
This is what happens to you, and this is why people don't. So it's worth looking at at David Lammy's speech from this last week, isn't it?
His speech or his PMQs?
Oh, sorry. Yes, his address at PMQ.
Yeah. Well, I mean, background. I can't remember what his address was, to be honest. All I remember is that 6 questions were asked about something that clearly the Tories knew about and David Lammy knew about, but they didn't want to say. So background for this. Obviously, last week we had I can't remember his name, but the Atreyan, I believe he was, man, who caused all the sparks off in Epping, the Bell Hotel, all that for sexually assaulting 2 girls under 16. He got prison for a year, but once you serve, I think, over a third of it, you can be deported if you're foreign. So he was earmarked for that. Screw-ups happened within the prison for whatever reason. He tried to hand himself in 5 times. They told him to go to the train station. Then he had a jolly round London for 48 hours or something. So that was very embarrassing for the prison service. And then it turns out it's happened 2 more times with 2 other sex offenders, one of whom's Algerian, I believe. And it's just a mess. And from basically everything I've heard from people who are in the prison or ex-prison governors and things like that, basically all of them have said, oh yeah, this is expected. The prison service is just terrible. We hire we hire frontline staff that are just not trained very well. Experienced staff have all gone. Turnover is crazy. We're now relying on a lot of West African immigrants as well to do the job, which that's basically to bring in cheap labour. But obviously, you get what you pay for in that way as well. Yeah. So because of this, news came out just after we got his name before. Now I've forgotten it again. James Cartledge of the Tories was.
Yes, James Cartledge.
He asked 6 questions. He only meant to ask 5, but he ended up asking 6 by accident. Same question over and over again to David Lammy. Can you confirm that another asylum seeker has not been accidentally released from prison? And David Lammy basically slowly lost his rag, shouting, "Get a grip, man," I think after the 4th question, which is the last thing you want to say in that tone if you want to seem like someone who has not been, not lost his own rag. Yeah, I mean, David Lammy's... I've never been impressed with David Lammy, and this is once again just something to add to the list of I don't understand how David Lammy's got to this position, but here we are. And obviously, prison service now have a microscope on them. And as we said before, Keir Starmer should have been there for PMQs, but he wasn't because he's in Brazil while everything's falling apart, which just goes to show how good of a leader he is, I suppose, because he looks competent.
If I can nip in there on
yeah.
Having been a manager for 8-9 years, whatever it is, there are times that you will find that somebody else has effed up and now it's your fault. Okay, I can see why he didn't. I am also not a massive fan of David Lammy, but at the same time I can sort of see how it's all like, well, I'm now having to stand up in the House, which of course is televised as well these days, and I'm having to answer questions on this. And the reality is, I didn't do this. Even equally said, my policies did not do this, but it's been done, and now you're asking me how this happened. And I mean, I have had that so many times. The other thing that the three of us have in common is a tech background, and I'm sure we probably also all know that, there are times when things can F up, and now it's your fault. And it's like, well, actually, it's not. But you try explaining that to anyone who doesn't understand the details of the system. Yeah. You try explaining that. So it's...
The customers messed around again. Yeah.
And the fact is that you remember, who was the Home Secretary under Theresa May?
Amber Rudd.
Yes, her. And she had to go the first time because of something that... Something was actually, it was a mess that was someone else's mess. But when you're the minister now, today, you're in the firing line and you think, well, actually, I mean, what do you want me to do about this? And I have specifically said that to people in a professional context. When there's been a mess and it's actually someone else's mess that I've just inherited, then again, that is the Chancellor's go-to excuse, which is why I say when I look at the way the Chancellor is approaching this, is like, I know what having a go-to excuse is that is genuine, and I know the difference between that and one that isn't, especially when half of the problem that leaves was because you want to chuck a bung at your trade union mates. There's one of those. I know the difference. Yeah. I've been in situations where there's been a genuine mess up that can be, at least down the line, attributed to me. I also know situations where really it can't, but somebody will try to do it anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, this is what I think David Lammy's going to stick in the job. I don't see how he wouldn't, to be honest. I also don't see how Starmer can survive another reshuffle, to be honest with you, which is part of the reason I think Reeves has survived as well. That and losing a Chancellor is a death knell. But I mean, I'm with you. This obviously isn't David Lammy's fault, but it is also... It's just another example of him struggling under any sort of pressure. It's not quite as bad as the time he was on an interview saying you never see cops on the streets anymore when there's one behind him, but...
I remember that.
Yeah, but...
then it was Mastermind, but was
I forgot about Mastermind.
It's such an example of somebody failing upwards for no reason other than, like, I was the first black man in Parliament. It's like, yeah, great, but
Well,
you're shit.
I mean, well,
Sorry,
this.
I should have sort of like, why? I just hate it.
I'll
I
beat
just
that.
hate
But no, I mean, I'm with this as well. It's like when the cabinet keep going, oh, this is the least amount of people going to private school ever, and it's like this isn't an advert for that.
No,
This is a
yeah,
reason for
you're
more
all-
elitism, if that's your point.
Yeah. On the flip side, it was just like saying, like, oh, we've got the most like representative working class parliament after the 2019 election. It's like, yeah, great, but you are all really dreadful. Like,
Yeah.
that's not good.
Yeah. Also, may as well touch upon this. David Lammy, Poppygate. Didn't have a poppy when he went up. Had to take a ceramic. Well, not take. He was given a ceramic one by I can't remember which MP, but he was a veteran, and so technically he had a poppy that had stolen valor. But I mean, coming at this from another angle, his excuse was very poor. I got a new suit because my godmother wanted to see me in it, or something like that. You know, it's the 6th of November. Poppies, realistically, at least from my perspective, I don't think they need a whole week before to be wearing them. Like, I don't remember it ever being this massive thing from the 6th of November. I remember it being massive on the weekend, and that was pretty much, and on the 11th, obviously, and that was pretty much it. But I think we've expanded that probably a bit too far. I say this as someone who is very patriotic, by the way, and does obviously appreciate the sacrifices made by the armed forces, certainly in World War One and beyond. But yeah, I think it was a little harsh on David Lammy. But again, the problem with David Lammy is that he doesn't know how to react in these situations. Really.
Well, I mean, can I just nip in there and say that indeed, Peter, you are that patriotic that you have not realised that it's actually pronounced patriotic on this side of the pond.
Oh, so pardon me. That you can blame that on my media diet of Family Guy and The Simpsons.
Yeah, no, well, this is the problem. I mean, America's best, its biggest export is its culture. Be that in terms of TV shows or movies or video games or that kind of thing. And we all think we know what it's like to be America. I've been there. They don't understand you. And the American pronunciation is patriotic. We don't say that.
Yes, we say patriotic, of course.
We do say patriotic. Yeah, my favourite one is when you get, and of course we've talked about this before. The very online right. Various people we've discussed before, who I won't name, but we all know who I'm talking about, who say, "I'm a proud British patriot," and you're like, "Yeah, you're that patriotic that you don't know it's pronounced patriotic."
Well, I will refrain from having a go in this particular case, but I will make sure that I yes, say the correct pronunciation.
I'm merely directing your attention towards that one. But it's worth noting, as I say with David Lammy as well, with that address to Parliament, again, you've got to get up. You're on the stage, as it were, because that's exactly what it is. Just as Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage. Well, at this moment, all the house is a stage, but all that stage is on the telly, if nothing else. So he's got to say, I've been in that many situations, I have to admit, where you've got to say something. So he says something. And, there's plenty of examples when the Conservatives are in power as well, where that could be the case. And I can see that being the case if there's a reform government as well. There's if that is what's coming up, is that you've got to say something. So you say something, and then you get briefed by your officials, and then you hope that this is what I was talking about with Amber Rudd before. She was misbriefed, and then that technically she has misled the House, so she's got to go. But actually, to what extent was that her fault? So if we're going to give properly impartial commentary here, we have to note that fact.
Oh yeah, it's bound to happen. I would imagine a reform government's a bit more resilient on that front, though misleading the House obviously is quite difficult to defend. I mean, well, this is what brought Boris Johnson down, and he was technically misbriefed as well, because he was told by his private secretaries having the cake's fine, doesn't break any rules, and then obviously it turned out it did. So how much can you really blame these people? Well, apparently enough for them to lose their job. And
well, quite so. But I mean, can I just go into detail on
Boris Johnson?
Something people don't seem to understand, right? And that's why this story that came out, where was it? It was Pippa Creera in the Mirror at first, I believe, where it came out. People don't seem to understand how Downing Street actually works, and to be fair, why would they unless they've been in there? But I have. So you have number 10, number 11, number 12. They're all basically joined at the hip. Like, you go in there, the first thing you have to do, you have to go to the left and hand your phone in. Because, unless you're authorized to have one, no phones. But you can literally walk through a door in any of those buildings and end up in the other one. You see that they're joined together, and they also have this communal garden, which is where the footage was shot from of people having, from above it, of people, sort of having these social gatherings. However, the reality is that as much as people like me have campaigned for a long time, this is pre-COVID, for the notion that actually a large part of the kind of tech jobs that I do, can actually be done remotely. That was one of the silver linings of COVID, was actually being proven to be true. But one thing you can't do remotely is run the sodding country. So these people were required to be around each other, within proximity of one another, despite ongoing, restrictions, all the time. And so whether they were in corridors, whether they were in meeting rooms, whether they were in the garden, the communal gardens between all three of them, of those buildings, is irrelevant. And, whether or not there was pizza or cake or beer or anything else present is irrelevant. If these people were going to be at risk of passing COVID between one another, they would have been anyway. Okay, so whether you have a nice celebration or not for somebody's birthday or whatever it is irrelevant. And that's what the media at the time persistently, and I would say arguably deliberately, refused to understand, and therefore put that into the public consciousness as though there was this notion that it's one rule for them and it's one rule for us. This is nonsense. The reality is, if you're someone who does, let's say you work at B&Q, for example. Let's say you work at B&Q. Well, that's an in-person, sales-based, customer-facing job, where you can't do that with those restrictions. If, however, you're someone like me, who at the time was working as a translator, remotely, cloud-based, from home, pretty much nothing changed. But if you're someone who is a very big part of the process of running the country, I'm sorry, the reality is that you need to be there and you need to be doing it. And whether or not you have a bit of cake alongside that is absolutely irrelevant. But people, got this mindset in their head now from that story, which was what led ultimately to the downfall of Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, that the fact that you have a bit of cake or whatever had anything to do with increasing the risk of spreading the prevalence of COVID is irrelevant. But the media deliberately sought to put the idea in people's minds that was the case, and it is not true.
I mean, I'm completely with you. I mean, I mentioned, I think, on the last podcast that my auntie votes Green because she had a natter with a Green councillor who knocked on her door about Boris Johnson. It was exactly about this, because specifically for my auntie, one of her grandsons has global development delay, and so spent a lot of time with him and obviously loved him very much. And obviously with lockdown, she couldn't see him as much, and obviously you're going to get very resentful when the media is saying, oh, look, Boris Johnson's having cake at your expense. But as you say, how much more key can you get than running the country? So I understand it. There is a funny story alongside this. Well, he's one of my cousins, obviously. One time Sir Graham Brady visited his school, and obviously there was questions at the end, and so he stood up at the end and asked him, why are you still friends with Boris Johnson after what he did? Which I did find very funny, and obviously he'll have a view on it. So which in a way as well is quite brave to get up and say.
Well, the media has a way of being able to alter public perception and put views in people's minds, and
yeah.
that's really, to me, that is the responsibility that comes with this, which is why when we report in the way that we do, as Wolves, we will. I said this before, and I know I'll go over it again. The British Petroleum Council story, branding them as far right. We reported on that and said, how on earth are you saying that, comparing them to the National Rally in France, which actually has quite a big history, which Reform does not have. Whereas at the same time, when they came out with their policy on, will redistribute wealth in this particular way, they didn't mention the self-employed, we nipped at their heels and said, you've not mentioned the self-employed. So when you said everyone in the bottom 10th decile, what you actually meant is 87% of those people. So, this is how the media is supposed to work. What's not supposed to happen is that it puts ideas in people's heads that have clearly been concocted for a purpose. I wrote a piece of Con Home on this one, actually. There was a plot to get rid of Boris Johnson, and indeed there was. In fact, if you know how the number of people who've had access to that footage in the first place would have been limited about half a dozen in the Cabinet Office, from the angle at which the pictures are shot. So somebody very deliberately leaked this to the media. The Mirror journalists went with that because it was a story, and I get that it was a story, but actually it was a concocted story. And I think what the media sometimes do need to do, the mainstream media and all the rest of us who consider ourselves alternative media, is to ask yourself the question, why are you getting this leak? What is someone else's agenda? And is it responsible as media to basically step into somebody else's agenda, to be part of what it is that they're trying to achieve, and you're doing it because you're getting a story, okay, but at the same time, is that entirely responsible? So that's my question as an alternative media person.
Yeah. My response to that, based on sort of limited experience, is that whole scandal to me is the first time that and I think many other people were exposed to actual uncut Westminster culture. And I think it's very telling that the public basically took one look at that and chose to drown it in the river. They wanted nothing to do with what to people that probably don't step outside as much as they should. They would have thought that that's very normal for Westminster. Whereas in reality, anybody that works any other job would obviously went, wow, that's mad. It's one rule for them and another rule for us. And I understand why people might think that it's not quite what happened, but the perception was there for a reason,
Well, yes, it was. The perception was concocted because it was known how it would be perceived.
Obviously, it was known how it would be perceived. What I'm trying to say is that it was perceived like that for a reason. I think it was quite dodgy. The fact that people weren't aware of this to the public would have shown how disconnected these people perhaps were from the ordinary person.
I mean, I'll throw this out as well. Was it Neil Ferguson who was the one of the big modelers who really pushed for lockdown? Didn't it turn out that he was seeing a woman on the side? I remember that being in this. I remember that. Well, I remember that being in the news for about half a week, and I thought that was far worse than what Boris Johnson did. And then obviously there's Matt Hancock having an affair, which I found that one of the oddest moral outrages ever, because people weren't morally outraged that he was cheating on his wife and splitting his family apart. They were annoyed that he was breaking lockdown rules.
I don't know how insane the whole lockdown treatment of people was anyway.
People forget how mad it was. I mean, my dad, whenever he comments on it, he says, "Oh, I thought millions were going to die." And I thought, I don't know why you'd think that, but then I realised that was at a time I didn't really pay as much attention to the mainstream. Yeah. It's like, we actually look into these models; they're nuts, not based on anything.
The thing is, you also have the fact that it's not just about models, and it's not just about way things were presented in the media, nor is it just about the communications that went out from Number 10 at the time. What you have to remember is that, as you just said, in fact, as you just highlighted, Peter, is people were panicking.
Yeah.
We were in panic. Nobody knew what was going on. Nobody knew what was going to happen. And we kept having these briefings almost every other bloody week. You know, as to what we did, didn't we? Special Balance, Chris Whitty, we had, I think they're both sirs now, I can't remember. Anyway, you know, briefing on what the status of this was. It wasn't until, in fact, when the first vaccine, I've forgotten which one that was, can't remember now, you know, only 2 weeks before that was sort of perfected, vetted, and sort of, we can cure this now, you know, we can vaccinate against this now. Only 2 weeks before that, Boris Johnson, as Prime Minister, was telling the country, we don't, or actually was telling the House, I think, in my Select Committee, we don't know when or whether there will ever be a vaccine for this. So again, what this tells you and what it shows you is that, yeah, okay, really, nobody knows anything. Until they do, and things can change very, very quickly.
Yeah.
My coping strategy, and we've all got one, if we're honest with ourselves, we've all got one. My coping strategy is just to expunge that entire period from my memory and pretend it never happened. You know, but for a lot of people
have done that.
Yeah, a lot of people have done that, but a lot of other people have done the reverse. When we now have the COVID action movement, which was called Zero COVID, and by the way, is run out of Diane Abbott's office.
Not surprised. I'm surprised that something's being run out of her office.
How are the numbers?
It might not be being run by her, I don't know, but I can share that detail, which technically is supposed to be confidential, but never mind. It's not that confidential. You know, the emails actually come from her office. So, you know, you've got these people, and these are people who are obsessed with the notion that COVID is still around, which technically it is, but, you know, that we all still need to be locked down, wearing masks, not seeing people, all that kind of thing, because some people's reaction has just been panic, you know, and for some other people it's been, you know, the idea was to marshal the herd into being panicked so that the numbers would stay down and therefore the government would look like it was doing a good job. Now, this is well documented in other places. I am saying this on the record. This is well documented in other places that this was indeed the entire premise of the measures. It wasn't really about saying, oh, you know, does Granny die at 84 instead of 86? It's not so much that anybody cared about that. It was more about keeping numbers down, keeping graphs down, and looking like we're dealing with this. And that was the case for governments all around the world, in the East, in the West, you know, in Africa, in the Middle East. This was the case for places everywhere. People who were in power needed to look as though they had a handle on a situation that nobody predicted. Nobody would have known about it, nor could they have done. I think even some people kind of, and I have spoken with, I will not name them for obvious reasons, but I have spoken with officials who were involved in it at the time who said, yeah, we don't want to be remembered for getting this wrong.
Yeah.
You know?
Like, I mean, I suppose it's a natural reaction when you're in charge. You want to look like you're actually doing something. If you don't look like it, why you're in there? Yeah. Anyway, I didn't really want to go on a 10-minute tangent about COVID, but this the fun about this podcast. We're down the pub and we can talk about whatever.
Apologies for that.
Do not apologise for that, because that was full of interesting stuff. I just didn't expect it, but it's fine because now we can segue on to something that certainly you two have experience in, and something that I do enjoy talking about, which is the national curriculum, because there's been a big review in it, which has effectively ended up, I think me and Simon, we've all talked about this a little bit beforehand, but effectively, it looks like they've not done as much for a review as we might have expected from these Labour types who want not necessarily a full blown cultural revolution, but they certainly want more diversity, DEI stuff, climate hysteria within the curriculum, and they have a bit of that, but maybe not as much as we would have thought. I suppose one thing I really took away from it was citizenship. I never did that when I was at school. I was at school I left school at 2014 to go to university. I don't remember ever having anything called citizenship, but that seems to just be a subject where they tip absolutely everything in. So my main takeaway, I did a video on this the other day, was they want a lot more financial literacy, which always bothers me because to me that always just means maths. Media literacy, which people won't know this, but that's quite a big meme in kind of the cinema sphere of Twitter and YouTube, where it's something that leftists say, and all it really means is whatever the author tells you, that's what it means, which is the opposite to me of critically watching, reading, or listening to a piece of media. But that's in for some reason. But what it means here in this context is, in the least charitable way possible, it seems to be how can you dismiss what someone is saying. That seems to be what it mainly looks at. Basically, listen to the experts, don't listen to alternative media. Obviously, we advocate a bit more balance than that, given we're on the alternative. And then obviously there's climate hysteria. I won't call it that. Climate change, education, that's in citizenship as what can you do that's sustainable. Oracy, which I think that was also in citizenship for some reason, but that's basically supposed to be in English. Along with reading and writing, you also need to be listening and speaking. That needs to be assessed, which I'm actually in favour of, to be fair. So that seems to be the only good takeaway. And now there's a fifth thing that I can't quite remember, but they're all lumped in citizenship, and then geography, obviously, and science takes some of the climate hysteria. Maths has some more financial stuff. Oh yeah, and a load of diversity stuff as well. History got a load of be more explicitly diverse. People want to be represented in all these subjects. And they're doing similar things in, say, English. That's like decolonizing the curriculum. They don't use those words for obvious reasons, but less romantic poetry, more people from ethnic backgrounds being read should be done. So basically, seems like a cultural revolution, but they're doing it quite quietly.
I mean, they do say it privately in circles when they don't think they're being observed. And there was a story that we published, actually went in the Sun, but it came from us, of this lady saying, well, basically all of us teachers are all like lefty Marxists. And then she goes, well, not all lefty Marxists, but actually we are something along the lines of
but our review, review now contains a load of diversity and climate hysteria. Yeah.
Oh, curriculum review. TLDR on that is, I think it was quite toothless compared to what it could have been. I think we all broadly agree that Labour Party-led curriculum review for many people, there is a certain image of what you're going to get in your head. But because it was delayed, I have a sneaking suspicion it actually was going to be more radical. But Labour took one look at the polls and thought, we probably can't stomach a, 2 to 5% dip in the polls. I think it's time to stick to something that's a little bit more established. I think the emphasis, speaking as somebody who is currently in this sector, has been on clarifying what people should actually do with the existing curriculum. Because for all the public perception of it, what Gove implemented is actually pretty vague and broad, and there is a lot of flexibility if you're clever about it. And that's kind of the equilibrium that we've been living in. So if you don't like what's been suggested to you, you can do other stuff as long as you can justify it to Ofsted. That's the trade-off. And I think one of the big influences, particularly in history, emphases in history from the review, was that we should just make teachers aware of that so they stop complaining about, we think the curriculum's Anglo-centric or whatever. But citizenship, as I know Peter is quite concerned about, there are some changes coming to citizenship lessons, and there is an increased focus on what we would expect from the Labour Party, which is diversity and climate stuff. Peter, what do you think about that? I think we all know.
Well, I think as we said before with Keir Starmer at COP, but this stuff's if it's as hysterical as I think it's going to be, which even when I was at school, God, I remember being taught this at about 10. That was 20 years ago. Oh, we only have 20 years left of oil and gas. Now everyone's talking about extracting more.
This actually the other day, yeah.
Yeah. So climate hysteria, which again, assuming it's as bad as I think it is, and I read through the review itself, which, as you say, it didn't really have much teeth, but you read between the lines, and it's why even have climate change stuff? At the very least, I will say to them, at least they kept it to science and geography where it's mostly relevant. I think they also tried to add it into DT to design and tech, so that where you're resourcing things and is it sustainable? I suppose to some extent that makes sense, but if something's not sustainable, the price goes up. So that's kind of a self-correcting part of it anyway. But
can I nip in on this one?
Yes.
So now, when I was at school, what is now called citizenship was called PVG, personal and vocational guidance. You see, that's since morphed into PSHE, personal, social, and health education, something like that. Whatever.
I think I had that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Me too.
And now we have this. Now, what I'm going to do is refer to. So I wrote 3,000 words on the school's white paper from 3 years ago. Okay. And now I have to switch tabs. But there we are. So the notice now, what I'm going to comment on is what you said about Simon as a Labour government. Oh, what a surprise we're having this under them. We are not having this under a Labour government. We are having this under a DFE government. Now, I remember about 10 years ago would be now, I was speaking to someone who'd worked extensively in the edtech sector with the DFE, and he said to me, it's going to take about 15 years of civil service churn before you get rid of this. Well, he's got 5 years left based on that initial estimate. Okay. This is government by DFE. This is not government by Labour. This is governance by DFE officials and people. Now, when I read this paper from 3 years ago, what was very clear to me was that the notion was that basically teachers, as in new teachers, young teachers, just as Simon is training up to be, couldn't possibly be expected to actually come up with their own lesson materials. Hence why they were chucking stuff from the Oak Academy and people like that at them. My contention was, well, how are they going to learn how to do it then? By the time that you get to the level of being maybe a deputy head who's actually in charge of curriculum design, that's one thing. But actually, how have you built up that experience? You've done it because you were a teacher and you were responsible for writing your own materials. There's nothing wrong with using resources and other people out there, although you have to be careful. I don't know if anyone remembers Sparklebox. You probably don't.
What was that, Patrick?
Sparklebox was a collection of arguably useful lesson resources that was in fact being put together by a paedophile.
Oh my word.
He then used that to gain access to other people's children by the teachers. Okay, so I'm
that's saying a Google.
Having you probably won't find it now, but having been in the sector at that time when that scandal was going on, okay, I can tell you for a fact, yes. So you actually have to be careful about where you're getting your stuff from. I would encourage all new young teachers to be developing their own resources, but what's happening at the moment is, or was, and so this, and I say this, that this the Schools White Paper 2022, this was one of the Conservatives. Okay, this is why I'm disconnecting it from politics, right? You know, the notion was basically that people should not be, you know, young teachers, they shouldn't be expected to put their own stuff together. We'll just chuck stuff out the wall and get it from elsewhere. Well, we've seen that go wrong before. And as I say in the piece that I wrote for Conservative Friends of Education, you know, I'm read a quote from you now. For you now. It says, in no other profession are newly trained employees expected to discover by trial and error how to deliver. Instead, as with other top professions, we must do more to support new teachers to succeed. Okay, now I'll tell you why that's bad. What I then go on to say is, well, while men may be from Mars, as the saying goes, and women from Venus, whoever wrote this is apparently from Neptune. Okay, seriously, in all professions, you need to come to understand the profession by yourself. And yes, it will be trial and error. What this was an attempt to ingratiate within the profession the notion that actually, no, you shouldn't be expected to do everything by yourself right from day one. Now, in fairness, we've all been in new jobs, we've all been on day one, and we've all been done, but the notion that, we'll just provide you teaching materials for you. That's an easy way of wiggling certain things in, now, isn't it? And how are you going to develop the skills to do it for yourself? Alongside that was the notion that, you know, functions should be centralized. So support services like IT, where I was, HR, finance, site management, that these should all be centralized along the lines of multi-academy trusts, right? MATs, okay? Trouble with that is, and when I was there, as far as I'm concerned, any member of school staff is an educator, is staff, is a role model for young people. So what did I do when I got my first apprentice, 17-year-old lad, who was suddenly sat there in my office, and I noticed that I could tell him to do something, and he'd actually go and do it. And I never, as I've said before on this station, I think, you know, I should not be allowed anywhere near that kind of power. But what did I also do? I got him involved in the school choir, just as I was. We were both baritones, for anyone's interest, and
very nice.
You know, and so we went to the church, so like Christmas service and that kind of thing, and we sat in the choir and we sang and we did that kind of thing, making it part of the school community. I also helped him with dealing with discipline with the kids, because at the moment, what do you have now? You have basically, as far as the kids are concerned, you have one group of staff in front of whom you can get away with whatever, and because they're not allowed to discipline you, and another one, i.e. the teachers, which you can't. But what message is that actually sending to the kids? Okay, so that's just another aspect to this in terms of how we manage school staff. Now, another thing, I'm just sort of moving through my own document, looking at the national funding formula. They're trying to say removing local control and moving it up to the government's levelling up agenda. So this is something that comes from civil services, civil servants under Boris Johnson's government. But basically, it says, having successfully introduced the national funding formula, we will now transition to using that formula to set each school's budget directly without local amendment.
Oh dear.
Okay. We know that we know that trusts use pooling or top slice mechanisms to ensure effective and efficient operations across their group of schools and enhance the resilience of their academies to respond to long-term challenges. Now, as somebody who has worked in the sector before, what's the difference between that and local authorities? Because local authorities, if you're a community school, they top slice budgets anyway. You know, so it doesn't really make much of a difference in terms of who is doing the top slicing. Somebody will be doing the top slicing, right? So there are lots of problems with this paper. What it basically is doing, and I will quote again from what I said, what I wrote. Now I can tell you exactly what this is. This is a DFE power grab. It is a further denouncement of the ability of schools and local authorities to have some idea of what they might actually need, and to draw further towards a centralised model of the way that schools are managed administratively, despite the official point being to give them greater control. That's what I said. Now, that leads us on to, there's more to say. There is, but we haven't got the time. So we haven't got the time. But
No.
My point being, when we look at, and we spoke earlier tonight about, this review of the national curriculum. Now, when Michael Gove borrowed Labour's idea of academies, it actually goes back far further. It does. It goes back far further. They used to be the CTCs, the City Technology Colleges. That's where it came from. Okay, this goes back to the early noughties. This was a new Labour idea. But there are only supposed to be a couple of hundred of them, you see. But when Michael Gove got in as Education Secretary under the coalition government, his notion was that actually all schools, or as many as possible, should become academies. And it was also government policy that academies did not need to follow the national curriculum. So that leaves you with the notion of what the hell is the point of having a national curriculum if you're also saying that most schools don't actually have to follow it. So I will end my long rambling rant with the notion of saying, if I were putting this legislation through Parliament, what I would put in it would be to say that all schools ought to have regard to the national curriculum, and then you make that an Ofsted or ISI inspection criterion as well, such that they need to be able to demonstrate that they've had regard to it. But that allows them to keep their freedoms that they've gained as an academy or a free school or UTC or something like that. I mean, there's a free school near Chester. The entire curriculum is music based. And this was the point of free schools, So it allows them to keep their freedoms, but they need to be able to demonstrate that they have had regard to the national curriculum without being forced to follow it. That means, one, there's still a point of actually having a national curriculum to begin with, but two, preserving the notion that schools need their freedom, and you can't give them their freedom like that and then claw it back again 15 years later, as has been the case in government policy recently. So I mean, that's my very detailed rant on this one, but you know what I'm talking about.
I mean, just to summarise that, not in your mind, the summary seems to be that obviously you've got free schools, and now a lot of them are becoming academies under Michael Gove, and this is effectively the Department for Education now trying to effectively establish kind of we matter again.
Re-establish control and re-establish an agenda that I think they are annoyed that was taken away from them.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked about that, because the woman, Professor Becky something or other, who wrote the review, I did a little look into her, and her whole background in like education inequalities and things like that, which, on the face of it may sound good, but my spidey sense always tingles as to, that sounds like something a Marxist does, though.
Yeah, speaking from a little bit of personal experience, yeah.
Well, there you go.
Education, academia is one of those funny industries where everybody seems to coalesce around the same conclusions. I mean, I never challenge their own fundamental assumptions about the human condition.
Well, I wouldn't be shocked if they, if one of their bright ideas was effectively, well, a bit like they did in Cambodia, just take kids off parents and teach them.
Yeah, I have to say that there is a bit of the sort of parent skepticism from some teachers. Not all of them, but I think there is a sort of eye roll attitude that happens towards parents that I think is a little bit like, come on.
Well, I mean, I have to say I've been quite surprised by how many people around my age are even thinking of homeschooling. And it's not even necessarily for educational reasons. A lot of them actually are just scared of their kids going to school because a lot of them feel like it's dangerous. But that's a whole other topic. I mean, I know, I have friends who homeschool and their children. The whole it's quite a funny one. A lot of the assumption is if you get homeschooled, you just turn out to be a bit of a weirdo. That happens sometimes, sure, but there's weirdos who went to school, me. On top of that, you never assume that someone normal was homeschooled, but obviously that does happen too. But you never will find that out because you'll never make the assumption and ask. So, yeah,
I'll nip in there just briefly on the safeguarding aspect.
Yeah,
about people going to school or not, or staying at school.
Hmm.
One thing we're taught, and you'll probably have this by now, Simon, in the safeguard, well, for me, it was annual safeguarding refreshers. There are some kids, they're average kids, you know, behavior is normal for a teenager. I'm talking secondary school level here. And suddenly they start acting up.
Oh yeah, number one thing to look out for.
Yeah, they start acting up and they start doing things that are going to give them an after-school detention. And they'll do that time after time after time. And you think, hang on, this was like a couple of years ago. This was just a perfectly normal kid. Why is he or she doing it? Because they don't want to go home.
Yeah, we got to also look out for that. The provider I'm with, they're very practical and sensible on the safeguarding stuff, more so than I think some others would be. So it's less of like 17 million PowerPoints about prevent and like why you should report people for having a Pepe meme on their phone or whatever. Actually, like, how to recognize signs of like actual like proper abuse and things like that. So they are really good on this.
Fair enough. Well, I mean, at that point, I will say we have run over, but then again, there was a lot to squeeze in this episode. So,
yeah,
don't worry about that. So, well, I will say on that note, thank you very much for joining us, Simon and Patrick.
Thank you too.
Right, and well, with that, I would like to thank absolutely everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, goodbye.